Subcommittee on Oversight and Energy will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled Examining Misconduct and Intimidation of Scientists by Senior DOE Officials. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Good morning and welcome to today's Oversight and Energy Subcommittee hearing examining the intimidation of scientists at the Department of Energy. Congressional oversight and authority to access information is a constitutional authority granted to Congress. Without open dialogue, the federal agencies, Congress, cannot gather the information needed to effectively legislate. Today, we'll examine a clear case of this committee's request for information directly related to the legislative process and the executive branch actions to block congressional access to federally funded research. Unfortunately, what we will learn at today's hearing is not an isolated incident. It fits a pattern of intentional misinformation from the Obama administration officials ranging from FDIC to NIST to EPA and now the Department of Energy. While today's hearing is disturbing in many ways, I am most concerned with this incident because it appears that unelected DOE officials sought retribution against a DOE scientist simply for respecting the constitutional authority of Congress in order to advance political priorities. The Committee on Science, Space, and Technology is the authorizing committee for scientific research and development. In order to fully inform the legislative process, committee staff must be able to engage in open discussions with federal researchers to fully understand the scope and value of existing programs. In fact, this open dialogue is protected in each annual Appropriations Act we pass in the House. Federal law prohibits department and agency officials from stifling communications with Congress and penalizes those who seek to silence federal employees by prohibiting the payment of their salaries by the U.S. Treasury. I would request unanimous consent that this provision of law be included in the record. Transparency from executive agencies is necessary to ensure Congress's ability to carry out our oversight and legislative responsibilities effectively. In this case, communications with DOE are central to the committee's oversight of the accountable use of taxpayer funds in scientific research. Sadly, it appears that politics has disrupted this important dialogue between Congress and the Department of Energy and derailed important scientific research in the process. When DOE decided it wanted to redirect funds to support President Obama's climate action plan, the department sacrificed the low-dose radiation research program to achieve this goal. This program is the federal government's only program to investigate whether the types of radiation received by Americans every day are dangerous. This research is vital to understanding radiation doses to patients undergoing CT scans or PET scans or the hazards of radiation to workers in the nuclear industry. The low-dose program is also crucial to understanding the effects of a dirty bomb or nuclear accident on potential victims. So it is a key research program to protecting our homeland. This is clearly science in the national interest. But when this committee took steps to specifically authorize this important research, DOE pushed back. When Dr. Noelle Metting, the DOE scientist in charge of this program, provided honest input on the merits of the low-dose program, she was subsequently fired by DOE senior management, all for the crime of working to conduct what is clearly important research and explaining that research to congressional staff. I want to make absolutely clear that Congress is not directing the technical experts on how to specifically carry out research. Instead, Congress decides the broad priorities and policy goals and makes sure that taxpayer funds are spent responsibly on research with the greatest potential while DOE carries out research at congressional direction. It is disappointing that DOE senior management would attempt to usurp this process and silence a federal researcher to advance political goals in violation of appropriations laws. This administration's bullying and intimidation must stop. I hope at today's hearing we will get to the bottom of the intimidation, deception, and misinformation conducted by the DOE officials for political priorities. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Virginia, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. And later on, I'm sure we'll have a chance to distinguish between political priorities and scientific priorities, because they are different. I want to thank the Chairman Loudermilk and Weber for today's hearing, and thank you, doctors, for testifying. In February this year, the Science Committee began investigating the Department of Energy's intent to stop funding the low-dose radiation research program and the related personnel action that resulted in the removal of longtime program manager, Dr. Noelle Metting. As a businessman, as a former ambassador, as someone who's been involved in transition of federal agencies after presidential elections, I think I know what good and bad management looks like. I also represent many federal employees, and they're often call my office when they see evidence of mismanagement or are treated poorly or unfairly themselves. From everything I know, it seems to me that in this instance, the Department of Energy was a bit overzealous in the removal of Dr. Metting and badly mishandled this case. This all stems from a briefing in October of 2014 requested by a majority staff member. I'd like to note that the Democratic Committee staff members were not present, nor were they invited to the meeting, so we can't attest firsthand to what actually happened. We can only rely on the accounts given during the formal transcribed interviews with only 2 of the 4 DOE officials that were present. On that note, I'm disappointed that yet another investigation by the committee's majority appears incomplete. To my knowledge, the committee's majority never formally interviewed Dr. Metting or the other DOE staff member who was present during the October incident. And in addition, Dr. Weatherwax, who is also testifying today, was not even present for the meeting or post-meeting discussion that resulted in the removal of Dr. Metting. So good luck today, Dr. Weatherwax. While I don't believe that Dr. Metting's actions at the briefing should be characterized as that of a whistleblower, I do strongly support the right of federal employees to petition their government and speak openly about their work without fear of retaliation. As a federal employee, Dr. Metting should have felt unbridled in her answers to and interactions with congressional staff. I certainly know as a sometime boss and manager, I always want to hear all sides of an issue. Yes and no, to make good decisions. I strongly recommend that the department take a closer look at how they handle situations like the one we're talking about today. And on that point, the scientific integrity policy that the department released in 2012 could certainly use a second look and potentially an update. The policy leaves gray areas that can create confusion and misunderstanding, and relative to other executive agency branches, DOE's scientific integrity policy is not nearly as robust. Agencies like the Department of Interior, NASA, NOAA have led the way in this effort. And given the quality and the quantity of scientific research at DOE, I'd really expect more from DOE leadership on this front. I also look forward to learning more about the future of low-dose radiation research today. I'd urge the department to be more clear with Congress about their intentions and rationale for changes in research priorities to make sure they're based on science and not, as our chair suggested, on politics. There's been a general lack of communication from DOE on these particular research activities involving low-dose radiation research. I hope we can avoid similar occurrences in the future. The clearer the communication early on, the better off. Before I conclude, I'd also like to add that I find this half-hearted investigation especially ironic, given that the committee's majority is engaged in clear intimidation of government scientists that are conducting climate change research at NOAA, including issuing a subpoena to NOAA Administrator and former astronaut Dr. Catherine Sullivan for emails of the scientists, all because the majority disagreed with the results of a twice peer-reviewed scientific study. And I point out that I don't believe the majority has ever produced a shred of evidence that would have justified that subpoena, although they made numerous unsubstantiated allegations of scientific misconduct by NOAA scientists. I think if we're going to talk about chilling effects on scientists, we need to look across the complete board. I think we can all agree that all scientists, government, academia, private sector, should be free of undue influence, be it politics or profit. Our policy decisions should be guided by our research, by our world-class scientists. When they speak loudly in unison, we should listen. I don't think that's always been the case in this Congress or on this committee. Lastly, this incident highlights the necessity of basic due process requirements, appeals, and federal employee protections, as well as the right of federal employees to have the right to union representation. If my friends in the majority are sincere about their concern for federal employees, and I hope they are, I'd encourage them to keep this hearing in mind next time Congress considers legislation intended to erode due process and collective bargaining rights for federal employees. My dad spent a year in Anahuac, 1956-57, provost marshal when they were testing nuclear weapons. So I'm very interested in what the impact of low-dose radiation is because he's only 92 and a half right now. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Beyer. And for the record, I agree with you. It is very important that we have the true testimony from the others that were in that meeting. And for the record, this committee did invite Dr. Julie Carruthers and Dr. Todd Anderson, who were present during the briefing October 16th, 2014, but the Department of Energy chose not to provide those witnesses for today's hearing. At this point, I'd like to recognize the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Energy, Mr. Weber, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Good morning. As Chairman of the Subcommittee on Energy, I have spent this Congress focusing on basic research that can benefit our nation by enabling technology breakthroughs. Throughout its history, the Department of Energy, DOE, has conducted research in support of nuclear energy and nuclear weapons complex. It has also explored the impact of radiation so that our nation's researchers, industry, and military can safely handle nuclear material. I bet you're all about that, Dr. Metting. They also maintain the nation's nuclear weapons program and dispose of that same nuclear waste. In my opinion, not only good energy policy, but good national security policy that the chairman alluded to. This use-inspired basic research leads to scientific discoveries and long-term benefits for the energy industry and for our national defense. Today, we will examine the Department's decision to terminate the low-dose radiation research program, and may I add, the only federal program currently conducting research in this area. This program actually does three things. Provides research that can inform authorities setting nuclear safety standards for the public. Low-dose research can also provide, number two, new data to enable federal emergency response agencies to more accurately set evacuation zones from radiological incidents. And number three, it provides research to enable practicing physicians to decide when and how to use diagnostics to detect cancer in patients. The research conducted in the low-dose program can also facilitate, I guess a fourth thing, medical research efforts to even combat cancer. Other than that, the research is really not useful. When DOE chose to close, and I'm being facetious obviously, when DOE chose to close down the low-dose program, this committee began to examine this research program. Why was that? Committee staff contacted DOE specifically to hear from technical experts about the broad impact of this basic research program and the potential value this research could yield for domestic energy, medical discovery, and national security, to put it in a nutshell. As this committee took steps to authorize the low-dose program through the legislative process, we relied on these open conversations with DOE researchers to draft legislation that would prioritize this important research and responsibly invest American tax dollars. These kinds of frank discussions between researchers and congressional staff are absolutely vital in this legislative process. Members of Congress must be able to trust that the information they receive from DOE is nonpartisan and, it, quite frankly, is delivered without political bias. Congress must get access to these facts. We have to make good policy. There's no way around that. Unfortunately, the Department violated congressional trust by attempting to censor information provided to committee staff. And what's worse, a DOE scientist was punished for speaking to Congress. That is simply unacceptable. Congress must be able to expect a high standard of accountability and honesty from federal agencies to effectively legislate and fulfill our constitutional duty to the public. When scientists get fired for speaking honestly about their work, it is clear that politics are negatively impacting the work of Congress and stifling public dialogue, not to mention stifling research in those key areas that I alluded to. I want to thank our witnesses for testifying today, particularly Dr. Metting for being willing to share her unfortunate experience with the committee. I hope that by exposing DOE's misconduct in this case, we can prevent this kind of inappropriate action in the future and preserve scientific integrity and transparency at the Department. American taxpayers deserve nothing less. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Texas, and now I'd like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Dr. Sharlene Weatherwax, Associate Director for Biological Environmental Research at the U.S. Department of Energy. She has previously served in a number of different positions within the DOE, including as the Division Director and Program Manager for the Biological Systems Science Division of the Office of Biological and Environmental Research and Program Manager in the Office of Basic Energy Sciences. Dr. Weatherwax received her Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from the University of California at Los Angeles and her PhD in Biochemistry from the University of California at Berkeley. Our final witness today is Dr. Noelle Metting, Radiation Biologist at the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Environmental Health, Safety, and Security within the Office of Public Radiation Protection. Dr. Metting previously worked in the DOE's Office of Science, Office of Biological Environmental Research, where she managed the DOE's low-dose radiation program. In addition, she worked for 20 years as a laboratory research scientist at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Dr. Metting received her master's degree in radiological sciences from the University of Washington and her Doctor of Science in cancer biology from Harvard. I now recognize Dr. Weatherwax for 5 minutes to present her testimony.
Mr. Chairman, ranking members, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Department of Energy's low-dose radiation research program and the decision to end the program in fiscal year 2016. My name is Dr. Sharlene Weatherwax, and I'm the Associate Director for Science in Biological and Environmental Research, or BER, in DOE's Office of Science. I have earned my PhD in biochemistry from the University of California at Berkeley and have research expertise in microbial enzymology and plant molecular biology. I joined the Department of Energy in 2001 as a career federal employee, and first as a program manager for the Office of Basic Energy Sciences, and then in BER. I rose to the Senior Executive Service position of Biological Systems Science Division Director in 2008 and became the Associate Director for BER in 2011. I am responsible for strategic program planning, budget formulation and execution, and coordination with other DOE program offices and other federal agencies. BER supports fundamental research and scientific user facilities to support DOE's energy, environment, and basic research missions, drawing upon the scientific expertise of researchers at academic and industrial institutions and the DOE national labs. The BER Biological Systems Science Division supports a diverse portfolio of fundamental research and technology development, serving as the basis for the confident redesign of microbes in plants for sustainable biofuel production, improved carbon storage, and controlled biological transformation of materials such as nutrients and contaminants in the environment. There's a very competitive environment for funding within BER, with exciting new scientific opportunities due to the rapidly changing nature of biological science. Since completion of the human genome sequence in 2003, the genome sequencing and analysis tools at the DOE's Joint Genome Institute have enabled BER's genomic science program to be at the forefront of developing the scientific basis for translating a genetic parts list for plants and microorganisms into scientific knowledge about biological system functions. This research is exemplified in the bioenergy research centers, which were started in 2007. The centers continue to produce the innovative science needed to foster production of fuels and chemicals from renewable biomass and are working to translate these basic science results to practical outcomes for industry and society. BER is also at the forefront of deciphering the underlying principles of genome expression in order to design new biological functions. With continued understanding of the genomic potential of plants and microbes comes the ability to manipulate and design new pathways into plants and microbes for beneficial purposes. Biosystem design concepts are at the heart of the ongoing biotechnology revolution and key to maintaining international leadership. In addition to these major efforts in bioenergy-related research, BER has managed a basic research program in low-dose radiation research since 1998. Over the past 18 years, the program has provided new technological advances and fundamental scientific understanding of the mechanisms cells use to sense, repair, and adapt to the impacts of low-dose radiation. Research investigations have included a number of critical biological phenomena induced by low-dose exposure, including adaptive response, bystander effects, genomic instability, and genetic susceptibility. The program was not intended to address regulatory policy, but rather to advance the fundamental science of radiation impacts on biological processes. To date, there are no studies that have been able to establish with sufficient certainty a threshold level of radiation below which the risk for cancer is zero, despite decades of research in this area. Any changes to the current protection standards would require strong and compelling evidence that a higher amount of radiation exposure is safe. The DOE low-dose radiation research program is ending in fiscal year 2016 as BER's biology portfolio continues to shift more towards bioenergy, biodesign, and environmental microbiology research missions. Funding levels have been steadily decreasing since 2012, with $1 million appropriated to complete the program in fiscal year 2016. The total amount of appropriated funding that the DOE Office of Science has devoted to the low-dose research program from its inception is over $250 million, and the program outcomes and data are available to the community and other interested agencies through peer-reviewed scientific publications. Biology is rapidly transforming to a more quantitative and predictive science, and the BER biology portfolio continues to extend its genome science efforts to plants and microbes to develop the fundamental scientific understanding needed for solutions to energy challenges of the future. Thank you for inviting me to speak about the low-dose radiation research program. I look forward to answering the committee's questions.
Now recognize Dr. Metting for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, ranking members, and other members of the subcommittees on energy and oversight. Thank you for this opportunity to testify at the hearing this morning. I'm a scientist, a radiation biologist, currently working for the Department of Energy, Office of Environmental Health, Safety, and Security. I'm actually on detail from DOE's Office of Science and BER, where from the year 2000 until December of 2014, I had, among other duties, been tasked with managing DOE's low-dose radiation research program. Over the previous 20 years, I was a laboratory research scientist, an experimentalist working in Pacific Northwest National Lab. I have a Master's of Science from the University of Washington and a Doctor of Science from Harvard University. In my remarks today, I will share my personal experience of being fired by DOE and suffering long months of unemployment that occurred as a direct outcome of my participation in a briefing for congressional staff. In a nutshell, the circumstances surrounding this intimidation and retaliation are these. Congressional staffers requested an overview of the low-dose program, so my immediate supervisor, Dr. Todd Anderson, asked me to prepare a PowerPoint presentation. It was duly reviewed, amended, and finalized. In a pre-briefing meeting attended by myself and Drs. Anderson, Carruthers, and Huerta, it was decided that for the congressional staff briefing, I would present my slides and handouts and respond only to the scientific questions, while Drs. Anderson and Carruthers would handle the budget and policy issues. During the congressional briefing the following day, on October 16th, I presented the agreed-upon material and answered accurately the many scientific questions directed to me by House staff member Dr. Aaron Weston and Senate fellow Dr. Ron Fabish. The staffers were very knowledgeable in the science. Their questions thorough and comprehensive, showing real interest in the subject. In fact, this deep knowledge was unexpected by all of us. After the briefing ended and the Hill staff had left, Dr. Carruthers accused me of advocating and lobbying for the program and of being too enthusiastic about research results. I was shocked. During the briefing, I had answered all the questions based on my knowledge as a scientific subject matter expert, all the questions based on with no intention of lobbying for the program itself. My only motivation was to fully and truthfully inform Congress about the state of DOE's low-dose program research. Drs. Carruthers and Anderson repeatedly accused me of lobbying. Confronted with this unwarranted and unjustified onslaught, I reminded them that they already knew I had disagreed with their plan to end support of the program. I also mentioned my concern as to how SC management had handled a specific congressional directive to designate an extra $16 million to the FY 2012 budget for Fukushima-related low-dose research. Thus began an unjust and painful saga of unrelenting intimidation. In just over one uncomfortable week after the briefing, Dr. Anderson removed me as manager of the low-dose program and detailed me to unclassified duties. My management obviously did not want me answering any more questions, scientific questions about the low-dose program. A month later, on December 4th, 2014, a notice of proposed removal was issued, charging me with insubordinate defiance of authority and inappropriate workplace communication. I was put immediately on administrative leave, subsequently denied access to the contents of my former office. There followed a very long period of stressful activity at my home, alone during the usual work week, cut off from my peers, trying to build a defense to the charges, guided by my NTEU representative. In early January, I filed a disclosure and complaint with the Office of Special Counsel regarding the $16 million budget directive, also sending information to DOE's Inspector General. 5 months later, a final decision of removal was issued by the deciding official, Dr. Stephen Binkley, and effective May 16th of 2015. I'm sorry I'm going over. Shall I continue? On the next business day, Dr. Sharlene Weatherwax, Associate Director of BER, was seen rolling a dumpster to my old office, and thus began, or perhaps continued, the removal of the contents, including irreplaceable hard copy notes, files, and documents, and some of my personal possessions. You may now appreciate that intimidation and retaliation in this case is somewhat self-evident. It's revealing that after I appealed to the Merit Systems Protection Board, and just before the appeal hearing started, DOE reached a settlement with me. I am currently employed, but feel there's continuing intimidation of scientists. To this day, I have not been granted the right to inspect remaining materials from my old office or to retrieve missing personal items. I suggest it's unacceptable that scientists are put under pressure to espouse views that are not their own, and that federal scientists are persecuted for presenting accurate information, professional opinion to those charged with providing funds for this research. Now, in my written testimony, I have a lot of information, timeline, and information about the low-dose program. Thank you for inviting me to share this experience.
And thank you, Dr. Metting. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for question. Dr. Metting, appreciate your testimony. In your testimony, as well as your written testimony, I believe you stated that when you were confronted by the Department of Energy Management, that they accused you of lobbying on behalf of the program. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, I do.
thank you. Dr. Weatherwax, was one of your goals for the October 16th, 2014 briefing with the congressional staff to dissuade the Senate from offering a companion bill to the House bill?
Chairman Loudermilk, I had no explicit goals for the briefing other than to provide information that was requested at the briefing. I did not personally attend the briefing.
So if the intention would have been to dissuade the Senate from introducing their own bill, then would you consider that a form of lobbying?
I am not aware of the official definition of lobbying, but since I had no intention of doing any of that activity, I can't really answer to it.
Well, someone in the DOE must know what the official definition of lobbying is, since they accused Dr. Metting of doing the same. Could we bring up this slide, please? Dr. Weatherwax, in this email from you to Todd Anderson, to whom I understand, and according to Dr. Metting's testimony, was the one that you preferred to speak to the congressional staff. In this email, you directed Dr. Anderson to conduct the briefing so that he would dissuade the Senate from offering their own bill with regard to low-dose radiation research. Now, that seems contrary to what you had just told me in answering that question. In fact, the email says, that's why you need to brief the Senate folks so they don't develop their own bill. These are technically different staffers than the ones who introduced the bill. Yes, when it was officially introduced, it has sponsors. Can you explain the purpose of this email if it wasn't to lobby Congress to do something?
So in the body of the email, the question arises around a House bill. So my understanding is that the briefing was designed to inform the staffers about the low-dose radiation program in general. So my understanding is that scientific issues are presented by the program manager, but the responsibilities of the division director, who is Dr. Anderson, are to communicate the strategic direction and the portfolio balance that he has developed. So,
Well, I appreciate that, but that is not what the text of the email says. The text of the email says that's why you need to brief the Senate folks so they don't develop their own bill.
so since it's Dr. Anderson's responsibility to communicate what is in his portfolio and to convey the program priorities that he has balanced for all of the competing scientific opportunities, his job was to present that to House and Senate so that they can see how he arrived at his conclusions for presenting his particular portfolio.
Okay, I'd like to go to Dr. Metting now, and I think it's clear that, and I think that's why you're having a hard time answering the question, is that this was indeed an intention of going and persuading Congress to do something, which is a practical definition of lobbying, which Dr. Metting was fired for doing. I think there's some hypocrisy here. Dr. Metting, is the narrative that Dr. Weatherwax instructed, is this the narrative that Dr. Weatherwax instructed Dr. Anderson to lobby against H.R. 5544 consistent with your memory of how the briefing went?
Actually, the briefing, it wasn't, because I believe that my management and Todd Anderson is my manager, and with the help of Dr. Carruthers, I think they were trying to lobby against this bill itself. They were trying to, they told me to.
Okay, to make clear that you were directed to basically lobby against the Senate introducing their own bill. Are we clear? Or that was the intention?
Actually, I don't think anything was mentioned to me about the Senate in any way. I was told that I would be doing the science, and that's it. But I was told in the pre-briefing that we are against this bill, and we don't want this bill to pass.
So as you stated in your testimony, that the result of you being released or fired was because that you honestly answered the questions by the staff, which you said you were impressed that they had the knowledge they had, and you were not lobbying to, they felt you were lobbying to keep the program just because you were answering the questions honestly.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I was only answering the questions.
Dr. Weatherwax, Congress relies on briefings with federal agencies, and in particular its scientists like Dr. Metting, to provide candid technical expertise on matters. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
It also seems that when it came to a briefing on the low-dose radiation research project, you viewed this briefing not as an attempt to inform Congress with technical expertise, but an attempt to prevent legislation. Is that accurate?
As I stated previously, our intent was to provide information about how we develop our budget priorities to balance the program portfolio that includes many broad elements, of which the low-dose radiation research is one. So we were there to provide a full accounting of all of the science that's presented so that Congress can make its own determinations about how we come to our decisions.
Thank you, and I have exceeded my time. I apologize, members of the committee, but I'll extend that same latitude to the other members. because I was not very well at managing my own time. I now recognize Mr. Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over 40 years of managing employees, I've had the unfortunate responsibility of sometimes having to fire people. Rarely, though, do I fire people on the spot. It's usually on the spot. It tends to be because they just got in a fist fight with somebody, or were caught lying outright to a customer, the like. So, Dr. Metting, we've heard a lot about your firing. Is your sense that you were removed because you were advocating for a program that you'd led for more than 10 years? Or were you removed because of, quote, insubordinate defiance of authority, that you're argumentative, that you called their actions idiotic, that it was basically because you disagree with them on the science, or because they saw you as unmanageable?
At the time, I thought that they were actually reacting to the $16 million question that I talked to them with after the briefing. But I also knew that they were very upset with me talking about the science in the briefing itself, which was a wonderful, actually a good opportunity to talk about the program, and that's why I was just very surprised when they were upset about that. That was not lobbying, that was talking to the science.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Weatherwax, it's hard for any of us here to know what happened in that briefing after the fact. We've had the transcripts and stuff, but I'm curious to know what steps you and others took at DOE to try to help mediate this and resolve the tensions between Dr. Metting and Dr. Anderson and other DOE employees. You know, it's a big step to take somebody out of a career they devoted a significant part of their life to. So did you seek mediation? Was there anything else that attempted to resolve the bad blood between Dr. Metting and the other folks at DOE?
So, Congressman Byer, so the process works to actually defend the rights of the employee and also the interests of the department. And in this case, the supervisor, Dr. Todd Anderson, submitted the proposal to remove Dr. Metting. So he issued the proposal. At that point, it was deemed that it had to go for Human Resources to actually advise on what the next steps would be. And so we followed the process at the department, which is that the proposing official submits some kind of request, and then the Human Resources and General Counsel provide advice as to whether or not there are sufficient grounds to take any action, any kind of personnel action. And so in this case, it's a process, as with all personnel actions, is that it has to be then handed over to HR and GC, and at that point, if they feel that there are sufficient grounds to warrant further action, then the process, the entire matter goes to the deciding official, who is a neutral third party.
Well, let me simplify. Does it seem to you in retrospect that it's an overreaction to fire somebody for advocating for a program that she spent perhaps 14 years of her life working on?
So I believe that the proposal to dismiss Dr. Metting enumerated a number of issues, and some of those issues, obviously, there are a number of those issues which are not related at all to the briefing. And so I think that was something then that the process had to look at, and that's what the deciding official was viewing. And so I feel it's not my position to make the determination of what course of action should be taken on something that is so serious. And so we relied on HR to advise.
So who was the deciding official?
In this case, the deciding official was Dr. Steve Binkley. He's another associate director in the Office of Science. He manages the Advanced Scientific Computing Research Office.
Thank you. Dr. Metting, prior to October 2014, had you ever been disciplined or reprimanded by your supervisors at DOE?
Mr. Congressman, actually never. I have never had anything written against me or had any disciplinary action, neither as a Fed.
So
or-
is this the first time in your career then that any supervisors have sought to reprimand or punish you?
Oh, yes, that's the first time. I was shocked.
Do you feel your actions immediately after the briefing, that heated exchange, were appropriate?
The heated exchange was in response to what they were saying, and after Dr. Anderson had raised his voice, and then there was actually some scientific content there. We were actually talking about the use of of science in BER. So it was under the rubric of a scientific exchange after everyone was gone, in the privacy of BER, really. And it was, I really actually feel like I was goaded. And I did say that I thought their decision was idiotic on there, and I was also not. I didn't like the way some of the questions were in the briefing itself. The question of, well, actually, Dr. Carruthers brought up the fact that DOE does not have does not set regulatory standards, and that was not true. And so I did correct that in a kind of a collegial fashion, and I think that was what Dr. Carruthers was reacting to after the briefing, in the post briefing.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. I now recognize the fine gentleman from the great state of Texas, Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Weatherwax, you stated in your discussion with Chairman Loudermilk that you didn't go there to lobby. You didn't go there at all to the meeting, but that it felt like your intent was to actually impart the scientific facts. And in your opening statement, in your testimony, you went through a whole bunch of litany of scientific facts. But let me ask you this. At what point did you become aware of the fact that this was indeed, there was a lobbying intent going on to use the term subtly yet firmly dissuade the Senate from filing the companion bill? When did you become aware of that?
I can't recall when I became aware of any.
Okay, well, let me help you with that.
Lobby.
Let me help you with that. On your email, can we put the email back up on the slide? It says, quote, Dr. Carruthers writes, and this is, by the way, October the 4th, 2014. That's the exact date. I think there's an opportunity to subtly yet firmly let the Senate know, blah, 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 blah. So you did become aware on you knew at least before October the 4th, 2014, or on that date, that there was this effort going on. Is that accurate?
So yes, I obviously knew.
Okay, well, let me move
I don't
on.
see the word lobby.
Let me move on. Well, to let the Senate firmly know, I mean, that is the definition, as our chairman pointed out. Dr. Metting had said in the pre-briefing, she had been informed of some things. Did you attend any kind of pre-briefing?
No.
Did you have emails about the pre-briefing?
I might have been copied on them, but I don't recall actually engaging.
So if we sent you a request for more emails about this briefing, you could find those for us?
Of course, if you inquired about any emails, we would provide them.
Okay. Well, let me do it this way then. Why was it thought that Dr. Anderson was better on staying on message in this particular instance? Do you have any knowledge of that, any email, written communication as to why Dr. Anderson needed to be chosen?
So typically, when we have briefings to congressional staff, it is the division director who usually attends. And so in this case, the division director is more experienced.
Okay, that's what I need. So if he's if he can stay on message, particularly if the message is to subtly yet firmly, to use the email's terminology, basically lobby the Senate against filing the companion bill, he was the logical choice?
So he used the appropriate choice to convey what our program priorities are.
Okay. It's my understanding committee staff meets with technical experts all the time. Our gentleman over here on the other side of the aisle said it was unusual, or the Democrats weren't about it, but I'm sure that they've met with committee, their staff has met with technical experts too. In your opinion, is Congress entitled to the opinion of experts, or just the ones that maybe Dr. Todd Anderson and the others in this instance agree with? Are we entitled to the opinion of experts, or just the ones that y'all agree with?
Congress is entitled to what they ask for.
Okay, so you would agree with me then that this lobbying effort, apparent lobbying effort, to subtly yet firmly dissuade the Senate was inappropriate?
I don't believe that's what my statement says.
Well, I wasn't asking you about your statement, Dr. Weatherwax. I'm asking you about what occurred in the email, and the obvious apparent attempt to convince the Senate, dissuade them from not filing the companion bill. That is lobbying in its truest form. Do you think that's inappropriate?
So since I never actually said that Dr. Anderson should lobby, his job.
But that's, I didn't ask, that's not my question. My question is, this attempt to subtly yet firmly influence the Senate, is that not improper to you? Yes or no?
Dr. Anderson was there to convey the overall program priority.
You're not gonna answer the question. I'm gonna move on. Dr. Weatherwax, it appears that you and other DOE officials wanted to ensure that Congress would not receive information about the DOE or the radiation program in an attempt to prevent legislation. And thus, that's the subject hearing matter for this hearing. Is that accurate to say? It appears, at least appears, that y'all wanted to dissuade this Congress from getting, the Senate particularly, from getting that information. Would you agree that it appears that way?
The Senate, if the Senate asked us to provide information, we provided the briefing.
Well, according to this, you have to have someone staying on message to subtly yet firmly let the Senate know. You did read that in the email, I take. You do read your emails?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That did not raise a red flag for you?
If the intent is to provide information about the science, we did not interfere with that whatsoever.
All right, let me do it this way real quick. On your testimony, you refer to your testimony on page 1. You say competitive funding on the BER, I'm going from memory now, programs. Was it so competitive that it seemed to justify an attempt to lobby the Senate not to file a companion bill in order to direct that funding that Congress was seeking to establish? Is it that competitive?
It is a very highly competitive funding.
So it sounds like y'all might have thought it was justifiable. I get that. And then on page 3, you go into the technical stuff and you say that a lot of the things that y'all do is to, quote, provide an analysis, and then you list some groups that can draw their own conclusions. And I won't go through it, bore you. It's on page 3 if you want to read it. So my question is, should Congress be allowed to draw conclusions as well?
Of course.
So you admit that. And so, but you don't say that the attempt to subtly yet firmly dissuade the Senate was a contravention of that idea that they could draw their own conclusions.
No.
Wow. Okay. Very good. Let me go to you very quickly, Dr. Metting. You said that somebody was your boss. Todd Anderson is my manager. Is that still true today?
Well, he's not supervising me today. I'll just say that I'm still a member of BER in Dr. Anderson's division.
Okay.
But I am on detail with the Office of Environmental Health Safety.
Okay, and you still, as of this date, have not been allowed to get your personal effects back?
No, not at all. The second day after I got back, actually finally got back to DOE, I called up BER. I was calling Kathy Holmes Dr. Weatherwax's admin person to see if I could come in finally and get my things.
Okay. And I don't mean to pry, but do you have grandchildren?
Yes, I do.
Were there pictures of your grandchildren included in that?
There could have been some pictures. There could have been.
Yeah, okay.
So,
So you mentioned that somebody was seen pushing a dumpster into your office to get rid of this stuff. And who was that?
I'm sorry that I have to admit it's hearsay, but I have the email from a colleague
Okay.
in BER who watched my associate director actually personally pushing a.
Is it the norm that they push around these dumpsters and do these kinds of things?
I have never heard
Never
of such
seen.
a thing.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from Texas. I find it very interesting that the statement was that it was appropriate for Dr. Anderson to brief congressional staff, but the DOE did not find it appropriate for Dr. Anderson to be here for the full committee. At this point, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And so you do have grandchildren. You know, I have children, and I got married later on in life, and one of my daughters has had some health problems. And I just want you to know that this research on low-dose radiation is vital to a lot of people's grandchildren and children, including my daughter. And I thank you for your dedication to finding out about this issue, because it is just essential for the health of so many people. And thank you very much for, my daughter had leukemia, so we know what that's about. And I am very, very honored and pleased that we have someone like yourself that is going to withstand pressure to go beyond your scientific responsibilities, but to basically try to achieve a political end, meaning that they trying to stop someone from achieving a political end by compromising your scientific commitment, because that's what it sounds like to me. And what this whole thing sounds like, Mr. Chairman, to me is that what we have here is an example of where scientists are feeling, at least in the Department of Energy and this Department of Office of Science, are feeling that they have to go in a certain direction in order to placate basically the priority of the administration, and which obviously was not holding low-dose radiation research as a priority. Let me know, I am a co-sponsor of the legislation that would have basically formalized that the money being spent, this money that's being spent, be spent there in the Department of Science on low-dose radiation research. Dr. Weatherwax, could you tell me, do you agree that those of us who are elected officials have the right to have those set those type of priorities? With the spending, with money that's being spent on federal research?
Congress certainly has the right for
Right, so we have the
generating
right.
legislation.
And so we do, and it's recognized, yet we have someone here who has dedicated her life to a specific research area that is being talked about now, and she is being given direction beforehand as what direction her answers should be to the people who constitutionally have the responsibility of making the decision. This type of, we hear all the time from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle that because we have doubts about man-made CO2 warming the planet, that we are politicizing science. And I will have to tell you, my feeling here is what we got as an example of politicizing science. Someone there in the department and in your Office of Science, although not a political appointee, feels compelled to try to placate the rest of the Department of Energy's commitment to global warming as being a man-made situation. That they're going to, and that goes all the way down, that what I call fanaticism on the global warming issue is being felt, the effects of that, all the way down to this very honorable scientist who spent 14 years of her life trying to do something that would be important for her grandchildren and my children and children all over the United States. This is, and I realize that you're trying to be as honest with us as you can, but it also, quite frankly, your answers indicate to me that there's a lack of willingness to take on other people in the Department of Energy who would be upset if you said anything to back her up. And, Mr. Chairman, this type of politicalization has impact not only on our responsibility, because what we're talking about now today is our responsibility as elected people. In a democracy, the people elect someone to make major decisions as to how money will be spent. Not only does it undermine democracy, but in the end, it hurts people. In the end, this research, which we believed was vital, much more vital than proving that CO2 causes the earth to get warm, that we felt that that money should go to low-dose radiation research. And instead, someone in the Department of Science tried to pressure her so that we couldn't back up that concept that we have, that scientific investigation is more important than spending it on man-made global warming. So with that said, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing, and I would like to compliment Dr. Metting for your courage, for your willingness to say the truth as you see it, and which is what all science has to be. And undermining that and having someone trying to tell you what you should emphasize and shouldn't emphasize in order to attain a political goal, which is basically to influence the decision makers who are elected to make the decision. You showed great courage and great patriotism. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman.
Chair now recognizes Congressman Randy Nagelbauer from also the great state of Texas.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Dr. Weatherwax, you're a scientist, is that correct?
That's correct.
At the Department of Energy?
Yes.
And I think your title is Associate Director of Science for Biological and Environmental Research. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So when you're doing research or investigations, are the facts important?
Yes.
Why are they important?
So scientific research is all predicated on obtaining facts. Facts obtained from experiments, often using controlled hypotheses, and collecting the facts helps us to refine our theories and then suggest further experiments.
So what if you were working on a scientific project and you were evaluating some previous projects that had been done, scientific research, and someone was directing you as to what science that you were able to view and would preclude you from looking at, say, other experiments that had been done in the same area? Would that be productive to your work?
I don't think that typically that's how science is done, so.
Well, no, but I mean, to answer the question, I'm not asking your opinion on how you think it's done or not. Would that be productive to your scientific research?
No.
No. So if you're a member of the United States Congress and you're trying to evaluate how we spend the taxpayers' money and what are things that are in the best interest of the American people, would you think the facts are important?
Yes.
Now, you know, do you think your opinion on an issue should influence the facts that you're willing to share with me?
If you ask me for a fact, then I'll provide it. I don't think my opinion
Yeah.
matters.
Well, that's what we ask for, and I think that's what we expect. And I think what members of this committee find very troubling is that there was an effort here that we had an oversight committee trying to, you know, do its job, and then we had people within the administration, and what's more troubling, I expect it from the administration, but from professional scientists, I don't expect that. And, you know, and I think what's discouraging here is that we had professional scientists, you know, trying to filter or influence the information and on how that was presented to the United States Congress. And you know, I find that distasteful. And I also find it very unprofessional. That you, from the scientific community, rely on the facts. It's important to have the facts because we're counting on you to both in your research and in your investigations to make sure that, you know, we are doing everything we can to keep the American people healthy and safe, and that this kind of behavior is counterproductive to that. And so I would say that I'm hopeful that this is not a pervasive culture within the Department of Energy or any other department of the United States government. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from California is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry I'm late. The Judiciary Committee is having a hearing at the exact same time. I want to explore how we can improve our scientific integrity policy at the agency. As you know, I'm sure the Union of Concerned Scientists has made an observation that the policy is rather short, and it's just 3 pages. And although I think it hits all the high points, it compared to the scientific integrity outlines of some other agencies, you know, it's on the short side. And I'm wondering how we might move forward and use this observation as a way to further improve the agency, and whether you have comments on that, either one of you.
I can't comment on how the department has developed the scientific integrity policy, but I can certainly say that as a scientist and the daughter of a scientist who worked on the space missions, I certainly agree that scientific integrity is important.
I'm just a scientist. I'm not in the management chain, but I would think that management could do better at Department of Energy.
All right, so it's not something that you as scientists would necessarily want to weigh in on. I just think, you know, the need, when you get to scientific integrity or any integrity policies, it's important that they be robust, but it's also important that they be communicated to not only to management, but to every person in the institution so that everybody knows what the rules are. And I think that, you know, I have great regard for the current Secretary of Energy. I mean, he's a fabulous scientist and individual. Steve Chu was, and also, I mean, a Nobel Prize winner. I mean, was the Energy Secretary when the current integrity policy was adopted. And I think that to ask, well, I don't know if there's time left in this administration, but to ask that this be reviewed and amplified would be a good outcome from this hearing, a productive outcome rather than just a negative one. And I'm hoping that we might, if I could, I would ask unanimous consent that we put into the record the analysis undertaken. It's entitled Federal Agency Scientific Integrity Policies, a Comparative Analysis, and it's done by the Union of Concerned Scientists. It's dated March 2013, but I think it's still pertinent and would be helpful to be part of the record.
Without objection.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think my time is nearly expired, and I'd be happy to yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you both for being here. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd also ask unanimous consent to be able to insert into the record 3 different letters. The first is dated March 18th, 2013. It's from a group of researchers in medicine, including Columbia University, which states, "Our limited understanding of low-dose health risks seriously impairs the nation's decision-making capabilities, both in the short and long term, after a large-scale radiological event." The next, I'd also like to include letters from the American College of Radiology and the Health Physics Society supporting my legislation, which passed the House in January of 2015. This bill is H.R. 35, the Low Dose Radiation Research Act of 2015. This is another quote from the Health Physics Society letter, and I quote, "A greater understanding of the effects of low-dose radiation on humans will not only add to our body of knowledge on the subject, but it will also enable us to make better decisions on what are the proper levels, procedures, and protections needed when our citizens are subject to exposure to sources of low-dose radiation." So I'd ask for unanimous consent to be able to enter those into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Questions, if I could direct initial questions, Dr. Weatherwax, if I could direct it to you. What was it your intention and the intention of others, such as Dr. Anderson, Dr. Carruthers, and Dr. Huerta, to attempt to prevent the benefits of low-dose radiation research from being presented to Congress?
No.
Dr. Weatherwax, if Dr. Metting provided that information in response to questions from congressional staff, then why was she removed from her position?
So my understanding is that the proposal to dismiss Dr. Metting details all of the issues, and those were the issues that were actually reviewed by General Counsel and Human Resources, and the procedures were followed. The deciding official is the one who viewed the entirety of all of those issues and made the decision.
Dr. Weatherwax, is it the role of the federal agency officials to prevent information from being accurately presented to Congress, as it was in this case?
I don't believe that the federal government inaccurately presented information in this case.
Well, clearly there was a slide that was removed, and I guess I think I have a slide that we can put up. Dr. Weatherwax, this is an email from Dr. Anderson to Dr. Metting on which you are copied. It appears to suggest that Dr. Metting, suggesting that Dr. Metting remove slide 4 from the briefing documents, a slide that lists all of the federal agency uses for low-dose radiation research. Isn't that precisely the information that Congress would want to know in a briefing about the program?
So I cannot comment as to why Dr. Anderson recommended removal of a particular element within a briefing. It could have been for brevity. I can't actually speak to why he suggested removal.
Yeah, I wish Dr. Anderson, again, were here to be able to respond to that directly. Also, I guess I think I've got another slide. There it is. The slide denotes the beneficial nature of low-dose radiation research for Homeland Security and the Department of Defense in responding to radiological attacks. Dr. Metting, in your scientific opinion, could the research developed by the low-dose radiation research program benefit federal emergency response agencies?
Yes, very much so. In setting evacuation standards, the levels at which we need to address different types of emergencies, yes.
Again, it's a great disappointment. I do look towards these hearings and the requests that we make to agencies as our ability to be able to be educated on what is happening, how funding ought to happen, what important programs ought to continue to be funded. And in this case, it seems like we were not given that opportunity. In fact, very directly, certain things were excluded from our ability to see. Dr. Metting, last question. Is this the sort of information that you think DOE management preferred to keep from committee staff during the briefing? And did the DOE management tell you to stick to talking points that excluded this sort of information?
Yes, it did.
Well, again, thank you so much. This is disturbing. This is frustrating. And I hope we can continue to get to the bottom of this, make sure that this never happens again, but also that there is justice in this. So with that, I will yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Virginia is recognized. No, you're good? Okay. All right, the gentleman from on my right here from Virginia, which is not often you're on my right, wants to do another round, so we will do that. Let me start by simply saying, or I'll tell you what, you go, Don. Sure. You betcha, you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd first like to respond to my friend, Mr. Rohrabacher from California, who talked about the fanaticism of climate change science, and just point out that 97% of the scientists in the world, China, India, Europe, et cetera, believe, often reluctantly, that climate change is real and that it's man-made and that it represents an enormous threat to mankind. This is not fanaticism, nor is it politics. It's just what the science is. I know there are 3% that agree that or believe it's not real. Two good friends of mine sent me pieces that believe that climate change is not man-made or there's nothing we can do about it. I don't think they're fanatics either. We should let the science be what the science is and then together try to make good decisions about how to move forward. Dr. Weatherwax, isn't it the responsibility of the Department of Energy to communicate the administration's science priorities to Congress? And it seems like we got off on the wrong foot when someone accused Dr. Metting of lobbying, which then led to lots of accusations of you and Dr. Anderson of lobbying. Isn't this more just the responsibility to communicate what the executive branch believes the priority should be, and then the legislative branch can do what they want to do?
Yes.
Thank you. Let me ask this same question of both of you. Dr. Weatherwax, is there obviously more to learn from the low-dose radiation program after $250 million worth of research, or have we hit a plateau period where we know most of what we think we need to know?
So I believe that, as with many scientific areas, always more can be gained. However, in this case, the program's priorities were certainly shifting more towards large epidemiological studies, which is studies of humans and populations and their exposure. And so those kinds of studies are probably the future of where this research field is going, and I believe that that type of research is ongoing. We are continuing to support a study, and those studies are being done by entities such as the National Cancer Institutes.
To Dr. Metting, the same question. Do you believe that the research had plateaued after $250 million, or did you feel you were on the cusp of dramatic new insights?
Actually, I don't believe there was a plateau at all. We had basically gone through all of what we could do with cell culture, and we were going into whole systems biology. And once we started moving into that, what we realized is that for very low doses, there's really not a cancer aspect to it. There is real interesting science that is asking what does the low dose actually do? And so we are looking at adaptive responses. We were looking at really excellent like the metabolic shift that occurs at very low doses that actually triggers an adaptive response, and it has very exciting directions to go, because low doses they affect your immune surveillance, and at the very low doses it's much different from the types of of mechanisms that occur at very high doses. And I agree with Dr. Weatherwax that we need a new way to look at the epidemiology. We've been only having the high dose epidemiology for so long. Now we're looking at low dose epidemiology, and that is exactly the type of science that we need to compare our new biology to. The old the A-bomb survivor epidemiologists are still using old biological assumptions. We have a whole new set of assumptions. The low-dose area is getting very exciting.
I'm about to run out of time. I'd like to submit for the record, if there's no objection, the Department of Energy's response to the Inspector General and the OS Office of Special Counsel regarding the $16 million disclosure, where the Department of Energy details how that $60 million was spent according to the congressional appropriation, if there's no objection, Mr. Chair.
Without objection.
And then one last question for you, Dr. Metting. Is there anything inappropriate with both you for radiation, low-dose radiation, Dr. Weatherwax, Dr. Todd Anderson, and others, communicating those understandings to Congress and then let Congress authorize and allocate the money it wishes to spend in its legislative wisdom? I mean, is there a reason why it's bad to have a necessary conflict between the administration's perspective and Congress's perspective?
Mr. Congressman, Ranking Member, I really don't think there is anything wrong with the conflict. Both sides should be looked at. Both sides should be heard.
And then hopefully the wisdom will emerge, right?
Yes, that's
Great.
scientific.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Weatherwax, I'm curious, what is the process like when you prepare for a meeting before Congress?
So typically, when the request comes in, it will come to the Department's Congressional Affairs, and they will then notify us as to what the request is and direct it to the appropriate office. If it's a matter of briefing appropriation staffers, then it would be budget-related, and then the most senior person will typically go, the person who has authority to develop the budget priorities and a responsibility for justification.
Okay, so when you come to a hearing before Congress, do you have objectives for the meeting?
So this is actually my first meeting with Congress, so clearly my objective is just to answer your questions.
Okay, so how in the Department of Energy, when you talk about the culture, you talk about, surely you've prepared others to come and give testimony before Congress. What's considered success? What's that like in the culture? You know, hey, you did a good job or you didn't do a good job?
I think if Congress is satisfied with the information that the department has provided, then that would be a successful outcome.
Why then was Dr. Metting's testimony before congressional staffers not viewed as success?
I don't believe that we actually made any kind of decision about success or no success after that particular briefing. I believe that the decision to, the proposal to remove, as I said, included other aspects that were not related to the specific briefing to Congress.
Thank you. Dr. Metting, after your October 16th briefing, were you officially removed from your position at the Department of Energy?
Yes, I was.
Without objection, I'd like to share an email exchange between Dr. Weatherwax and Dr. Anderson. They appear to be debating whether to provide Dr. Metting with an official notice of proposed removal from federal service on the day of the office holiday party. So this was December. Dr. Metting, when were you informed about your dismissal from the department, and could you please elaborate on how that happened?
Without objection, so ordered. You wanted that in the record.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Congressman. Okay, so it had been very tense, you know, since the October 16th, and then when I was taken off of my duties as managing the low-dose program. And I had talked to my union representative, and everyone knew I was a little upset. But then there wasn't anyone who would really, Dr. Anderson, Dr. Weatherwax would not talk to me about the subject. So it was very tense. The morning of December 4th, we had a big potluck. It's a lot of fun. We're out in Germantown, so we can bring large amounts of food. And I was tasked, or I volunteered to bring the turkey dressing, the mashed potatoes and gravy, and we had our party, and then directly after the party, I was informed that there would be a personnel action in 2 hours, and that, or something like that. I don't really remember the exact things. I was so shocked, and that you should probably bring your union representative with you at that time.
Was this consistent with the culture that something like this would happen, or was this kind of a new trend or new event, single data point in the culture?
Oh, you mean the personnel event?
Yeah, just you know, you're coming right off of a holiday party. You're coming off of a testimony where you gave
It was shocking.
testimony.
It was shocking, and it was out of the ordinary for me. I mean, I've never, ever had anything even against anything that I've done. I've always had very fully successful program reviews.
Thank you. Dr. Weatherwax, in your experience at the Department of Energy, is it general practice for an agency scientist to be told what they can and cannot say during a congressional testimony?
No.
Have you ever been instructed to censor scientific opinions when communicating with Congress or other agencies?
No.
So is it your opinion that this was an outlier of an event with Dr. Metting?
We never told Dr. Metting we never attempted to censor scientific content.
Okay. It does appear that you were dissatisfied with the way the conversation went and took action, and it seems to have potentially had a stifling effect. So my time has expired. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman for yielding back. Dr. Weatherwax, in your exchange just recently, the last exchange with the gentleman from Virginia, he talked about an opinion on climate change, and it's okay if the administration has an opinion and you think they ought to be free. He asked you, didn't you think they ought to be free to pursue what they thought was important? Do you remember that exchange?
Yes.
Okay. So, the gentleman from, well, let me do it this way. Let's hold that thought. Dr. Metting, did you feel attacked after that meeting and obviously leading up to the party you were talking about?
After the briefing, I was completely attacked, and at the time it felt like it was, you know, it was a surprise, and it was unforeseen.
Well, I apologize to you for that. From what I know, that should not have occurred, and you should not have to endure that. And I hope you get the pictures, if there are some of your grandchildren, back. But suffice it to say that I agree with an earlier comment. Thank you for coming up here, because as important is the fact that the process has been attacked. And I think we're seeing that today. Now, Dr. Weatherwax, we talked earlier, and I asked you a couple of questions about the lobbying intent, and you said you didn't have an opinion. You weren't sure that was lobbying. But we have another email, and I use the words subtle, you know, to keep the Senate from filing a bill. Can we get that email up on the screen? Can we get that one up on the screen? The email I had originally, yes. There you go. So, you know, I talked about the subtly yet firmly, which is the third bullet point. But if you go up to the second or fourth bullet point, but if you go up to the second bullet point, it says, if the goal is to squash the prospects of Senate support for the HHT, Anderson's better. So I'm going to come back and say to you now, you've expressed an opinion about climate change and what the administration ought to be free to do or not do. Now, do you also have an opinion that the goal to squash the prospects of Senate is inappropriate?
Dr. Anderson is responsible for conveying the program.
But I'm not asking that.
biology.
I'm asking you, Dr. Weatherwax. Do you expressed an opinion with Congressman Byer about whether or not we disagree on global warming? We can get into that later. So there's discussion about that. Do you have an opinion that the goal to squash the Senate's action is inappropriate? The email, now this email came to you. I'll remind you.
That's correct. The email
Okay.
came to me.
So did you not have an opinion at that point that this might not be the best policy of this department?
So my interpretation of that comment was that Todd's job was to provide the broad overall context for how the program priorities within
Yeah,
his
it's
area
not about
of
his
responsibility
your
affect-
interpretation of him. It's about the attempt to squash. It clearly says squash it. You're a scientist. You have a PhD. You know what squash is. Do you have an opinion on that?
I guess
You're
I-
just not going to. You're not going to offer an opinion on it.
I think I did not interpret that comment as squashing any scientific content.
Okay. Well, then let me move on. So, Congressman Byron, yourself had the exchange about whether or not you agree with global warming. I think he said the fanaticism. Fanaticism. There we go. Thank you. I have to get, according to Mr. Rohrbacher, yeah. But the fanaticism, in their opinion, and there's been some attorney generals, as you're probably aware from reading in the news accounts, that have gone after ExxonMobil because, in their opinion, they think they've suppressed some things. But isn't the fanaticism of suppressing what a scientist can say in a congressional committee meeting as dangerous as the purported climate change, no matter where you fall on that side of it? Isn't that fanaticism just as dangerous? Do you have an opinion about that?
I don't see that Dr. Anderson was squashing the conveying of science.
It's interesting that you bring him back up, because I was asking about a broad overall perspective about the fanaticism of suppressing a scientist from testifying before Congress committee staffers. That's just as bad as the purported fanaticism of denying global warming. Wouldn't you say that's just as bad?
I don't believe that we ever squashed a scientist presenting scientific views to Congress.
All right, well, let's do it this way. There's another, there's actually an excerpt from Dr. Todd Anderson in a transcribed interview that the question, and it's up on the screen, that says, question, is President Obama's climate action plan a priority for the Department of Energy? Can you see the answer there? Are you able to read that? What does it say?
The answer that Dr. Anderson gave is yes.
Yes, it is. And what's that second question? Can you read that for us?
The second question says, and is that a greater priority than the low-dose radiation program?
And he says, to the extent that we align our basic research efforts toward that goal, yes. So clearly they're prioritizing, right? Now the question is this. This is testimony provided by Dr. Todd Anderson in a transcribed interview with committee staff. Dr. Anderson asserts, if you're following his question and answer here, research that benefits the President's climate action plan is a higher priority than low-dose radiation research. So here's my question. Is the DOE ending the low-dose radiation research program to divert funds, and I would say to subtly yet firmly encourage, if that's a better word for you, the Senate to divert funds toward research in furtherance of the climate action plan? Does that look like that to you?
No.
It doesn't. Okay. Well then, Dr. Weatherwax, the DOE fired an employee in your exchange with Mr. Davidson of Ohio. He said, did you think that the meeting was a success or a failure? She got fired because of it. So obviously somebody thought that what occurred in the meeting was bad. You have an opinion on that?
I believe that the justification for dismissal was outlined in the proposing documents and that there were issues greater than what transpired during the briefing.
So the operation was a success, but the patient died. Okay, so you don't have an opinion that that was figured a bad meeting. Is the Department of Energy in this process sending a message to research scientists that they better somehow toe a political party, a particular, I'll do it that way, party line? And if they don't agree, if they express a difference of opinion, it is in peril of their careers? Would you agree with that?
No.
You don't agree with that? Okay. Last question. That's for you, Dr. Weatherwax. In your opinion, is it okay for the Department of Energy to lobby the Senate to firmly but subtly prevent them from filing a bill?
If the Department of Energy actually lobbied for something, then I don't believe that that's what happened.
Okay. And so to follow up the last email, the goal to squash the Senate prospects is inappropriate of filing that bill.
I think that the goal is to convey the broader context of how we set our budget priorities.
Well, there certainly seems to be some control there. Dr. Weatherwax, I appreciate your testimony, but it just looks like you're more focused on, I guess, the science, your part of the science research, instead of the topics here today that we say, look, this is inappropriate. There is some inappropriate behavior going on, as one of my members over here said earlier, and we want to make sure that that stops. And the fact that you don't recognize that and won't provide at least an opinion that it was categorically inappropriate and that it might need to be a little attitude adjustment in the Department of Energy is frightening to me. But anyway, I appreciate you being here. Dr. Metting, anything you'd like to say before we close?
Mr. Chairman, I think you've done a fabulous job at laying out all of the issues.
Well, thank you. How many grandchildren do you have?
I do have 2 grandsons.
2 grandsons. They need a sister.
That's what I'm telling my other son.
Well, thank you both for being here, and this hearing is adjourned.